On this map is a boat of cultural imperialism. It's a boat full of cartoon characters and sort of like, yeah, these very commercial entertainment characters from North America. And so it's talking about like the mass corporate controlled production of culture. And that is like a major export that the United States sends out to the rest of the world, including to this region. But actually, one of the things that we see as a contrast between these two worldviews is that this worldview is actually a lot less complex and vibrant and alive than this one over here. This one is incredibly diverse and full of both stories of incredibly creative and vibrant resistance movements to the policies and mega projects that are coming in from the map, but also the continuation of cultural practices of an incredible diversity of human languages and species, and then also like the creation of alternatives, the creation of new, like different food systems, economic systems, ways of organizing decision-making structures and communal living that are, some of which are new alternatives, but others of which come from many, many generations, thousands and thousands of years of history. And so actually, that's a really good segue. Do you want to switch over here? Yeah. If you want to like shift yourselves to this part, we'll tell you some of the stories from in here. And one of the reasons that we drew this part twice as big is because we really want to emphasize these voices. What we often hear in the media and like in news and entertainment, we're often very much inundated with this worldview over here. And we don't often hear the stories from below, from the grassroots. These voices aren't so loud. And at least up here in North America. But actually, some of the alternatives that exist and the resistance movements that exist are actually like incredibly inspiring. And one of the things that I take away from this is that, like, in my own work for social justice, is that I really want to take leadership from communities, like from frontline communities who are first and foremost impacted by these issues, and also from indigenous communities who have been struggling with a lot of these issues for many, many, many generations. And so you'll see that one of the main features of this inside piece are these streams of animals, creatures in the air and creatures of the water that are sort of spiraling down around this massive tree. And those are all species that are either endangered or extinct. And they represent the ancestors. And that was one of the major themes that the Beehive heard throughout the listening trip that preceded this graphic, was that over and over people were saying, like, this struggle is nothing new. You know, yes, we're fighting to stay on our land and not be displaced by a big dam. Yes, we're like struggling with increased militarization of our communities or like privatization of land and resources. But this is nothing new. Our ancestors have been dealing with this since colonization began. And to remember that history, to remember those stories and the stories of resistance and the stories of genocide and repression that's been happening for generations, we can also learn a lot, especially here in North America, for folks who are struggling against being displaced by mega projects happening here in Maine, like the East-West Corridor, or water privatization that's happening. These privatization grabs that are going on right here. We can learn a lot from communities who have been resisting those things for generations. And so, with that, let's dive into some stories. This is our scene of a solidarity economy. And in contrast to the economic system on the front, on the map, which the point of that economic system is to make a profit, is to create wealth. And the point of this economy is to sustain life and to grow food and to have healthy humans and healthy ecosystem. And so actually, I want to start by talking about this part, which is right in the middle of this beehive. So this is a scene of a Melipona bee and a vanilla orchid. And the Melipona bee is releasing eggs and the vanilla orchid is releasing seeds, and they're coming together to create the phases of the moon here. And it's this scene is talking about like the intricate relationship that this bee and this flower have with one another. The Melipona bee is the only bee that can pollinate the vanilla orchid, the only insect. The only other way to do it is to pollinate it by hand, which is an incredibly intensive process and really difficult to do. But these two species have developed in the same ecosystem and developed this like beautiful symbiotic relationship that's very specific. And that relationship also mirrors, again, this concept of like ecological diversity and cultural diversity. And so as in Mesoamerica, a lot of the people who hold knowledge about these native bee ecosystems and who keep bees and know how to create habitats for them or like facilitate habitats for them, a lot of those folks are older indigenous people. And as those communities increasingly are being wiped out, either through economic forces that create such intense poverty that people are migrating, or like directly being challenged through military invasion, a lot of that knowledge is being lost. A lot of those ecosystems are being threatened. And a lot of the people who, throughout many generations, have sort of helped to nurture Melipona bee habitats are no longer around anymore. And so that's talking about this connection between culture and ecology. And one of the statistics that I just learned is that like human languages are going extinct at a greater rate than species. And so, you know, this is like one tiny example of that dynamic of how that works, or the relationship between those, but also just sort of speaks to the bigger metaphor of all of this. But also not just in terms of diversity, but also I just read that the World Wildlife Fund just released a report saying in the last 40 years, we've lost 50% of wildlife on Earth. That was like a study that just came out a couple weeks ago in the news. And so that's another part of this whole ancestral stream and of this intricate connection between all the parts of an ecosystem that work together to make it vibrant and healthy. But this scene of a solidarity economy is a really hopeful one because it shows all the different ways that communities are choosing to organize themselves in order to provide for their basic needs. And up at the top of the hive, the very most well-protected spot, we have the youth. We have the little larvae and the grubs of the bees. And up at the very top, we have some bee astrologers who are aware of a much broader context of the natural world, of the movement of the moon and the planets, and they're planting their seeds in accordance with the phases of the moon, which is a practice that a lot of farmers in this region do. But they're also nurturing all of these young, and there's a scene here of popular education going on with a big banner. They're doing storytelling and having discussions about it. They're using a seesaw to pump honey. And down here we have bees designing like how they're going to collect pollen and from where and how they're going to use it. They're making seed balls, which are being lobbed at this machine invading from the edge. They're making candles out of beeswax. They're composting, because in this system, there's no waste that gets taken away and put in someone else's place. Like, they actually are processing everything that they create and recycling it and composting it. Down here we have bees making tortillas and making honey. Over here they're doing a little presentation about cutting out the middleman. And this is a little inside Beehive joke where in previous graphics there have been like scorpions or mosquitoes used to portray the bad guys. And then the Beehive decided that they didn't want to use any animal species as like the bad guy anymore. So that's why we use sort of accessories and machines now. But we invited those species back in this poster to have tacos and be like, sorry we demonized you. Come hang out for a little Beehive show with us. And then down here, these bees are making a map of the region. This is a map of the roots of this ceiba tree. And behind them is a map of the whole region of Mesoamerica, creating this grid of trade between these smaller solidarity economies. And so all of the stories for this section of the poster came from real communities who were practicing some of these things. Oh yeah, I forgot to point out, this is a bunch of carpenter bees making housing for different pollinators, including bats and other pollinators besides bees, because they recognize that they need to be in solidarity with all of the pollinators to create an ecosystem that's going to support all of them.
So maybe this is a good point to transition. As part of our tour, like we were saying, we're kind of looking to hear from folks who live in Maine and folks who are dealing with big mega projects or the privatization of resources or any other struggles that you're really going through. And in particular, the Zapatistas have this saying that's kind of like one world with many other worlds. So talking about that, their thing is kind of like they invite people to come and learn from them and learn how they start their communities, but also that the people who live in your own community, it works for every other community and it works in different ways. And so the only people who can really do those kinds of things are those who live in them.
The Zapatistas are a group in southern Mexico of indigenous communities who have created autonomous territories, which they had for 20 years now. They had an uprising when NAFTA went into effect that basically established these autonomous territories where they create their own laws and economies and food systems. Do we want to? Cool. Well, we had this idea. Let me grab them over here. But we thought that it would be really awesome. One of the things, so we do a lot of education with these graphics, and people use them in different ways. And our friend did a workshop in Detroit where they sort of like did this workshop where they had people basically write examples of these different themes as they were playing out in Detroit and put them on the map. And now the Beehive is actually making its next graphic about gentrification in Detroit, which is really exciting. That just happened, or that idea just started rolling, which is super cool because this one took 9 years to make and there hasn't been a new graphic in a long time. But we wanted to do that exercise with you guys and see if you can find scenes that resonate to you with issues that are going on in Maine or that are going on in your sphere of awareness in your life. Either on the front or in this middle part here. And so I'm going to put these like notepads around, and you can come up and just like fill it in. If you've got something that's like alternative economics, or we have a scene of a food system here, of a market scene. We have all sorts of different kinds of resistance going on. And so come on up and look around and see if you can find things that relate to local examples.
Yeah, so part of the reason why there are so many the scene is talking. I see the word community on here. It's talking about community meetings and also community decision making. And so the process of making decisions between you and I, instead of having these big global monsters make the decisions for us, but also the importance of recording how those decisions are made and preserving the history as to how these different actions and ways we talk to each other are done.
And how sometimes that process of recording is actually an integral part of the decision-making process. So for example, the Zapatistas, who we mentioned earlier, after their initial uprising in the 1990s, went into a very long period of negotiating these peace accords. And one of the reasons why it was so long was because each community sent a representative to these peace accord talks, and then that representative would listen and would have to then travel all the way back to their rural community, which could take days or weeks, to share what was learned, listen to everyone's perspectives, and then would go back. And it was just this really lengthy process, and that recording and taking back of information was a critical piece. They were not just empowered to go make decisions on behalf of the community. And so that in that particular decision-making model, that recording is super important. And also, just to tie it back to Maine, just want to give a shout out to the place where we are right now, which is definitely a community media hub. And thank you guys so much for existing and for hosting us.
Yeah.
And that's